This is session 5, and so we are almost through this, and I just commend all of you who have come on a regular basis, all of you who have watched through webcast and just really pressed into this important subject of how Israel is God's prophetic timepiece in the world. And so I hope that this has been beneficial. Me and Edie were just talking, and she was just saying how amazing this class has been, how amazing the Watchman on the Wall manual is. It's just a huge source of wisdom and education. All of the work that has gone into this manual, I can attest to from Eagle's Wings. So if you haven't, I know we're halfway through this class, but if you haven't purchased a Watchman on the Wall manual, even those over webcast who may have been watching, whether you've participated throughout the entire course or have just listened here and there, this Watchman on the Wall manual is really essential for your library, even at home. Edie was telling me how, she'll pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but this has widened her prayer closet. This has widened her ability to know how to pray for the land, how to pray for the people, what to pray for, what God is doing with his land and with his people. So I really want to encourage you to get that. You can get that through our bookstore by going to www.shekinahchurch.org, or you could also get it through the actual source, which is Eagle's Wings Ministry. So feel free to purchase this manual because it is awesome. But I'm excited to dive into tonight's subject. I was a little intimidated by the subject, actually, because Pastor Benjamin is really the media guru. So I thought initially when we broke down who's teaching what, I was like, oh, Pastor Benjamin's got this. He's going to be teaching the media myths and misconceptions. And lo and behold, it is me. But I was excited because I really dived into the manual. I really dived into my research in this. And a lot of this I already knew from my years of research and studying, even being and going to Israel. But it was just so helpful to a fresh look at this and just be educated so we have a fresh lens as we're looking at the media and looking at what's being portrayed today. So whether you've heard this before or whether this is the first time that this is being introduced to you, I just want to challenge you to press in tonight because it's a really important subject, okay? So media, what we're discussing tonight is Israel, media myths and misconceptions. So what I am going to do before I dive into the teaching is I want to use some media tonight. So get ready to look at the PowerPoint slides. Those of you who are watching through webcast, you should have those slides as well being presented to you. But we're also going to look at some video clips tonight and just see some things to help just expand our knowledge and our education of this subject. So Adam, if you're ready with the first YouTube clip, I want to whet your appetite for what we're going to be diving into today. So go ahead and look at the screens for the first YouTube clip, please. Coming soon. I'm sure Adam's on top of it. Adam, if you're back there, just clip number 1, please. Okay, if we don't get it. No, it's a YouTube video, actually, but I'm sure it may have just froze in the back, so I'm sure he's rebooting it now. But if we don't get it right now, I'll just dive into the teaching as well. I know Elaine went back there to check on it for us. We'll just give 1 minute. Thank you, ladies. Did all of you get the PowerPoint?
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is perhaps the most complex political issue of our time. Many have resorted to simply blaming one side or the other. But if we take the time to understand the history and correct our misconceptions, a potential path forward for the Palestinians begins to emerge. So let's start by trying to get the story straight and clear up 10 of the biggest misconceptions out there. Misconception number 1. Israel illegally stole land from the Palestinians. In 1947, the UN voted to give land to both the Jews and the Palestinians. The Jews accepted their partition and legally formed the State of Israel. The Palestinians rejected their partition and attacked. Even after losing the war, the Arabs still had most of the land from the UN ruling. Which leads us to misconception number 2. The surrounding Arab nations actually want to create a Palestinian state. So after the war, the West Bank and Gaza were controlled by Jordan and Egypt for 19 years. During that span, those governments never established a Palestinian state. Instead, they kept the land for their own use. Misconception number 3. The Arab nations want to solve the refugee crisis. Palestinians have settled in Arab nations throughout the Middle East. These nations could solve the crisis immediately by granting refugees equal rights, but instead, they refuse to let them vote, own land, or even study in public schools. Ironically, the only country to grant them full citizenship rights is Israel, which absorbed 156,000 Arabs after the 1948 war, and even today, Arabs hold seats in the Israeli government and Supreme Court. Misconception number 4. UN efforts are helping to solve the refugee crisis. The UN did step in to provide assistance to the Palestinian refugees, but instead of using their existing agency that helps resettle refugee populations around the world, the UN created UNRWA, which labels every Palestinian as a refugee until a Palestinian state is formed within the borders of Israel. This makes it more difficult for Palestinians to thrive in their host countries and locks them into perpetual refugee status, passing it on to their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, swelling the refugee population from 500,000 in 1949 to nearly 5 million today. As conditions worsened, the international aid started to pour in, which, incidentally, is misconception number 5. The solution is more money. Really? Western nations have given the Palestinians a ton of aid. Even taking inflation into account, they've been given 25 times more money per person than Europe was given to rebuild after World War II. Where's the stable economy? Where's the improved infrastructure? That money sure could have helped, but it was given to some leaders who had a different agenda, which brings us headlong into misconception number 6. Forming a state is the primary goal of top Palestinian leaders. All of this international aid did go to help ease one man's suffering, Yasser Arafat. After his death, accountants hired by Arafat's own family discovered secret investments worth more than $1 billion. That income stream would be threatened if a new state was formed, which gives leaders like Arafat, or Mahmoud Abbas for that matter, $1 billion+ reasons to never actually sign a peace treaty. Which leads us to misconception number 7. Israel has a true peace partner. In the year 2000, desperate for a resolution, the Israelis elected Prime Minister Ehud Barak with a mandate to make peace with the Palestinians. Barak offered Yasser Arafat 94% of the land he demanded, except Jerusalem. Arafat flatly refused. President Clinton blamed the failure of the best chance at peace in 60 years squarely on Yasser Arafat. Which brings up perhaps the most common misconception of all, number 8. Israel just needs to give up land for peace. The last time Israel tried this was in 2005. They forced thousands of Jewish settlers out of Gaza, and in exchange, the Palestinian leaders promised peace. But when the Israelis moved out, the Palestinians voted Hamas in. Yep, they elected a terrorist organization who, since taking power, has fired more than 10,000 rockets into Israel. Surprised? Then you've probably bought into misconception number 9. Most Palestinians want a lasting peace with Israel. Some Palestinians do, but they are a minority. For 60 years, Palestinian educational leaders have fed their children a steady diet of hate, idolizing suicide bombers and celebrating death right in the classroom. And finally, misconception number 10. Giving the Palestinians a state now is the only solution to their suffering. This has been the only approach tried for the last 60 years. But these are people we're talking about. And waiting until they have a state to give them equal rights has only made things worse. Currently, Israel is the only nation to grant full rights to the Palestinians within their borders. But by granting them equal rights in every nation where they live, we could immediately increase the quality of life for every Palestinian. Let's be honest, these misconceptions have concealed potential solutions. When we take time to clear up confusion and face reality, we begin to uncover the truth. And that's when real progress towards justice can begin. Real towards justice can begin.
So you can find that on YouTube. That was made from Jerusalem's Institute for Justice. So I found that, and I just thought that would be a great opening to class tonight, just to give you a taste of what we're going to be diving into when we're talking about media myths and misconceptions. We're going to be addressing many of those that were just talked about in that video, but we're going to be focusing on two categories today. So the two categories that we're going to be focusing on that the misconception in the media really stems towards is, number one, Israel's character. So most times, the very character of Israel is being focused on, and instead of the actions. And then we're going to be talking about the misconceptions of Israel's actions. So the media tries to twist the character of Israel, and then they also try to twist the actions of Israel. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, those two categories today. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the danger of widely accepting the misconception about Allah, which is the God of Islam. We're going to talk a little bit about how many people, even widely in the Christian circles, are starting to believe that Allah is the same God of the Bible, Yeshua. And so we're going to be addressing that misconception tonight as well. So, misconception number one that we're going to be talking about when it comes to the character of Israel is the statement and the misconception that Zionism is a racist idealism. So some of you may remember in some of our previous sessions when we talked about Zionism, Zionism was formed by Theodor Herzl. And it was the idea of the Jewish people returning and longing to go back to their homeland, Israel. So that's the essence of Zionism. So the origin of this misconception happened in 1975 when the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution slandering Zionism by equaling it to racism. In his spirited response to the resolution, Israel's ambassador to the UN noted that it was irony that when this very resolution was created and accepted by the UN, it was the exact same time of the anniversary, the 37th anniversary of what is known as Kristallnacht. I might be pronouncing that a little wrong, but basically what that is, it's the pogrom that was carried out in Nazi Germany, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. So this resolution was formed on the anniversary of that very thing that happened to the Jews. And this resolution was aimed at denying Israel's political legitimacy by attacking its moral basis for its existence, okay? So what I want you to do is we're going to go to the next clip now, and I want you to hear the response from Israel's ambassador to the UN when this resolution was created. So Adam, if you could go to the next clip, that'd be great.
Mr. President, I stand not here as a supplicant. Vote as your moral conscience. Mr. President, I stand not here as a supplicant. Vote as your moral conscience dictates to you. For the issue is not Israel or Zionism. The issue is the continued existence of this organization, which has been dragged to its lowest point of discredit by a coalition of despotisms and racists. The vote of each delegation will record in history its country's stand on anti-Semitic racism and anti-Judaism. You yourselves bear the responsibility for your stand before history. for as such will you be viewed in history. But we, the Jewish people, will not forget. For us, the Jewish people, this is but a passing episode in a rich and event-filled history. We put our trust in our providence, in our faith and beliefs, in our time-hallowed tradition, in our striving for social advance and human values, and in our people wherever they may be. For us, the Jewish people, this resolution based on hatred, falsehood, and arrogance is devoid of any moral or legal value. For us, the Jewish people, this is no more than a piece of paper, and we shall
Israel's representative to the UN, and that was his response to that resolution declaring that Zionism is racism. And the UN accepted that resolution, and that was the response of Israel's UN ambassador. So there we go again, seeing the UN's part in the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. That was their contribution, as we see over and over again, what the UN does. But our response, what is our response to this? When you hear this in the media, when you see people, you see a picture right there, you're seeing a demonstration of people that have taken this and have adopted this misconception as truth. And so you'll see signs there that says Zionism is racism. You see signs there saying that Israeli Zionism is ethnic cleansing. And you see signs in that protest saying that Israel is an apartheid state. So what is our response to this as Christians, as believers in truth? First, we need to know the origins of Zionism, which we've taught in this class, but I want to say the definition again so it's clear in your mind. Zionism is the Jewish national movement of rebirth and renewal in the land of Israel, which is the historical birthplace of the Jewish people. That is the essence of Zionism. It's rooted in the liberal principles of freedom, democracy, equality, and social justice. So therefore, Zionism is fundamentally opposed to racism. So that is why this is just absurd. That this is absolutely a misconception and something that is being blasted out there to skew your perspective of Israel. Israel is comprised of Jews and non-Jews from at least 100 different countries, from diverse ethnics, racial, and cultural backgrounds. So Israel absolutely is not, and Zionism is absolutely not fundamentally racist. So talking about this also, we need to be aware of what Israel's law of return is, because this is also why this misconception has been a part of people's understanding or lack of understanding is Israel's law of return. Some people criticize this as being racist. A potential testimony to the safe and free haven that they will always have a state of Israel after centuries of persecution and isolation. So those of you who were in the class of the history of Christian anti-Semitism, the history of the Shoah, you heard how over and over and over again the Jewish people didn't have a home. They were being exiled from every country that they tried to find refuge in, that they tried to find safety in. They were being exiled all over the world. So this law, when Israel became a state, the law of return was a law that basically said to every Jewish person and their immediate family that you will always have a home in the state of Israel. So no matter where you're at, if you are exiled, if you're being pushed out, if you're being persecuted, you will never have to worry about having a place to go ever again. So that is essentially what Israel's law of return is. The uniqueness of Israel as a country is that it grants automatic citizenship to its Jews, to Jews, as well as non-Jews who are in their immediate family that seek shelter in the land. Those who are not eligible for automatic citizenship under the law of return are eligible for Israeli citizenship under regular procedures equivalent to such requirements in other countries. So just like, anyone comes to America and needs to go through the process of citizenship, if you're not Jewish and you're not granted the law of return, that doesn't mean that you're not ever going to have access to being a citizen in Israel ever. That just means that you need to go through the regular requirements that it has you go through to obtain citizenship, okay? So ultimately, the UN resolution was repealed. That repeal happened in December 16th, 1991, 16 years later. So this resolution was put in place for 16 years until it was finally repealed. Unfortunately, numerous effects have been made by the Arab representatives to reinstate this horrendous resolution. So even today, the Arab representation are trying to reinstate this belief, trying to reinstate it in the UN. But we just need to fight against this misconception. Next, I just want to share some quotes with you. The first quote is by civics right lawyer Alan Dershowitz. The quote is, "A world that's closed its doors to Jews who sought to escape Hitler's ovens lack the moral standing to complain about Israel's giving preference to Jews." That's the first quote there. The next quote is from Martin Luther King Jr. When approached by a student who was attacking Zionism, this was Martin Luther King's response. "When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews. We're talking anti-Semitism." So we said it plain there. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second misconception that we're going to be talking about tonight when it comes to the character of Israel. So the next slide. Misconception number 2 is, as a self-described Jewish state, Israel is by nature an undemocratic and discriminatory country. That is the second misconception that we're dealing with here. So people feel uncomfortable calling the state of Israel a Jewish state. Why is that? Because when they call it a Jewish state, that sometimes equates in people's minds that it's more of a theocracy than a democracy, correct? So they get nervous about calling it a Jewish state. But it's governed by laws drafted by a democratic elected parliament. That's important to know here. So when people are trying to tell you that the land of Israel is undemocratic, you need to know that the whole infrastructure of Israel's government is a democratic system. It's influenced by Jewish values. So this is, again, where things can be twisted here. The nation is influenced by Jewish values, and it adheres to many Jewish religious customs like Shabbat and the high holy days. But that is no different than many Christian nations that celebrate Christian holidays such as Christmas and Easter as national holidays. It is no different than that. Our second slide here. Democracy, not religion, is the cornerstone of the state of Israel. So here is a quote from Hillary Clinton And she says, "And Israel is not only our ally, it is a beacon of what democracy can and should mean. If the people of the Middle East are not sure what democracy means, let them look at Israel." That's a quote from Hillary Clinton. Israel guarantees that its government will be for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, peace, as invested by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. And it will guarantee freedom of religion, and so on and so on. That's a direct quote from the independence, the independence of Israel. Israel has no state religion. Isn't that interesting? It has no official state religion because it wants all faiths to enjoy freedom of worship. But unfortunately, Israel is attacked for its Jewish character. While 21 Arab states have Islam as their official religion and do not allow religious freedom in those nations. But Israel's the one being attacked for being, quote unquote, undemocratic. So we need to be aware of this misconception that is out here. Just a few months ago, our U.S. ambassador commented on her first meeting that took place at the UN Security Council, and I want you to see this clip as well. Some of you may have seen this on the news, but I definitely wanted you guys to see this clip when it related to the misconception out there. So Adam, the next clip, please. I have a lot for him.
So the first thing I want to do is talk about what we just saw in there. The Security Council just finished its regular monthly meeting on Middle East issues. It's the first meeting like that I've attended, and I have to say it was a bit strange. The Security Council is supposed to discuss how to maintain international peace and security. But at our meeting on the Middle East, the discussion was not about Hezbollah's illegal buildup of rockets in Lebanon. It was not about the money and weapons Iran provides to terrorists. It was not about how we defeat ISIS. It was not about how we hold Bashar al-Assad accountable for the slaughter of hundreds and thousands of civilians. No, instead the meeting focused on criticizing Israel, the one true democracy in the Middle East. I am new around here, but I understand that's how the Council has operated month after month for decades. I'm here to say the United States will not turn a blind eye to this anymore. I'm here to underscore the ironclad support of the United States for Israel. I'm here to emphasize the United States is determined to stand up to the UN's anti-Israel bias. We will never repeat the terrible mistake of Resolution 2334 and allow one-sided Security Council resolutions to condemn Israel. Instead, we will push for action on the real threats we face in the Middle East. We stand for peace. We support a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that is negotiated directly between the two parties, as President Trump reiterated in his meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. The outrageously biased resolutions from the Security Council and the General Assembly only make peace harder to attain by discouraging one of the parties from going to the negotiating table. Incredibly, the UN Department of Political Affairs has an entire division devoted to Palestinian affairs. Imagine that. There is no division devoted to illegal missile launches from North Korea. There is no division devoted to the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. The prejudiced approach to Israeli-Palestinian issues does the peace process no favors, and it bears no relationship to the reality of the world around us. The double standards are breathtaking. Just a few days ago, the United States sought, unsuccessfully, to have the Security Council condemn a terrorist attack to Israel, where the terrorists opened fire on people waiting for a bus and then stabbed others. The Security Council would not hesitate to condemn an attack like that in any other country, but not for Israel. The statement was blocked, and that's downright shameful. Israel exists in a region where others call for its complete destruction, and in a world where anti-Semitism is on the rise. These are threats that we should discuss at the United Nations as we continue working toward a comprehensive agreement that would end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But outside of the UN, there is some good news. Israel's place in the world is changing. Israel is building up new diplomatic relationships. More and more countries recognize how much Israel contributes to the world. They are recognizing that Israel is a beacon of stability in a troubled region, and that Israel is at the forefront of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technological discovery. It is the UN's anti-Israel bias that is long overdue for change. The United States will not hesitate to speak out against these biases in defense of our friend and ally, Israel.
All right, you can turn that off, Adam. I don't know what that is. All right, going back to our slide now. So that dealt with the misconception of how Israel's nation is undemocratic. So we need to know across the board, we need to know the core way that Israel was founded as a democracy, and to combat that misconception that is being, even today, as we saw out there in the news, in the media, that's being force-fed to us and told to us as lies. The next misconception that we're going to talk about now is the action of Israel regarding the Palestinians. So we're going to talk about the Palestinian refugees. Who are they? What is the real story? What are the facts? So when we talk about the Palestinian refugees and the right of return, virtually, sorry, I'm trying to go to the next slide here. Perfect. Okay, so the Palestinian refugees who claim the right of return, virtually almost none of them who live today actually lived in Israel. They are mostly now comprised of their children and their grandchildren, of those who fled from Israel in 1948. So the total of those who fled from Israel in 1948 was approximately 650,000 Palestinians. They fled because the other nations told them to fled. The other nations surrounding them that were about to attack Israel told them, come, flee, because we are going to destroy Israel, and then you can go back and occupy and go back to your homes that you are leaving. So Israel is not the one that told those Palestinian refugees to leave. It was actually the other 5 Arab nations that were surrounding Israel at the time. So now the number has now swollen to almost 5 million refugees. That is unheard of. So now we are going to watch another video explaining further how this started. So Adam, now on to the next video, please. Wanted to use lots of videos to really bring this home.
Visit Israel, and you'll be startled by how many colors you'll see. I don't mean the colors of the buildings or landscape. I mean the colors of the people. Black, white, olive, brown, and everything in between. Israel is a true United Nations. That's because Israel is a nation of refugees from everywhere. And more than half of them are from, are you ready? Arab countries. Over 850,000 Jews were expelled or fled from the Middle East and North Africa following the Arab country's attack on Israel when it gained its independence in 1948. For over 2,000 years, these Jews had lived in the Arab countries of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, and in the Muslim but non-Arab countries such as Turkey and Iran. Today, they form over half of Israel's Jewish population. Many of these Jews from Middle Eastern lands look, well, just like other people from Middle Eastern lands, of darker complexion with dark hair. Other Jews migrated from North Africa. So why is their story so unfamiliar to most people? The most important reason is that they didn't remain refugees for long. But refugees they most certainly were. The vast majority forced to leave their homes, possessions, and businesses behind. In other words, they came to Israel with nothing. Some 650,000 of the Jews forced to flee North Africa and the Middle East became citizens of Israel. The other 200,000 fled to the United States and other Western countries. To give you an idea of how few Jews remain in Arab countries, consider these numbers. There were 150,000 Jews in Iraq in 1948. Today, there are less than 10. There were 140,000 Jews in Algeria. Today, there are less than 50. There were 75,000 Jews in Egypt. Today, less than 20. The pattern is the same across North Africa and the Middle East. Now contrast these forgotten Jewish refugees with the most celebrated refugees in the world, the Palestinians. How is it that the Jewish refugees are not even an afterthought, but the Palestinians are the longest lasting, most lavishly supported refugee population in the history of the world? The answer is purely political. After Israel gained its independence in May of 1948, the surrounding Arab nations attacked the new Jewish state. As a result, about 700,000 Arabs living in Israel fled. Many left because of the war, and many did because they were told by Arab leaders to leave the Jewish areas. The idea was that they would return once the Jews and their state had been destroyed. Khalid al-Azam, the Syrian prime minister in 1948 to 1949, admitted this Arab role in persuading Palestinians to leave. In his memoirs, he wrote, "Since 1948, we have been demanding the return of the refugees to their homes, but we ourselves are the ones who encouraged them to leave." That's how the Arab, later renamed Palestinian refugee crisis, was created. In 1949, the United Nations formed UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Palestinian refugees, the largest and only long-term UN agency that was ever formed to deal with just one group of refugees. 70 years later, it still exists and still calls the Palestinians and their children and their grandchildren refugees. It has an annual budget of over $1 billion, funded mostly by the US and the European Union. How much did the Jewish refugees who were expelled from the Middle East and North Africa receive from the UN? How much did Israel receive to help toward their resettlement? How much does it receive today? The answer to all three questions is the same: zero. So the next time you hear someone talk about the Palestinian refugees, ask them why they never talk about the Jewish refugees. And the next time you hear people talk about Israel being settled by Europeans, ask them if they've ever seen an actual picture of Israelis in color. I'm Dumisani Washington of Christians United for Israel for Prager University.
To subscribe to our YouTube channel,
Okay, awesome.
click here to help keep our...
Gotta love YouTube. Going back to our PowerPoint presentation, that just gives you a snapshot that we focus so much on the Palestinian refugees that left and fled Israel by the behest of the 5 Arab nations surrounding them, that we forget to even mention and even think about almost exactly the same amount of refugees, all the Jewish refugees that came from all of the different surrounding Arab nations that had to flee, that were exiled from those nations in 1948, that had to leave their homes, that had to leave all their possessions, that basically entered Israel with just the clothes on their back. What did Israel do? They absorbed and took in all of those refugees, other than the 200,000 other refugees that fled to the United States. So we forget about that. So what did Israel do? They absorbed all of those refugees, and almost immediately what they did when they welcomed them into the nation with nothing in their hands is they handed them a rifle and said, "Welcome to Israel. Now you have to fight for the country that you've now entered into," because they were that day heading into war by the 5 surrounding Arab nations that were threatening to wipe them off of the map. So when we talk about the Palestinian refugees, we need to look at that in perspective. Going on to the next slide here. What happened to those Arabs who chose to stay in Israel? So that's something that we don't think of a lot too. We're always focusing on those that fled, those that are now refugees, but those that chose to stay in Israel, they and their children received full-fledged citizenship in the state of Israel. There was no, partiality given to them at all. They received full and equal rights in Israel. The Palestinian refugees who have not been allowed to settle in any of those Arab nations that they went into and they fled to, they have been kept in camps since 1948. Can you imagine that? None of those Arab nations have allowed them to absorb into their nation. They've kept them as refugees in camps, accepting them instead of accepting them into their nation. The question is why? Honestly, why? Why would they do that? If Arab nations wanted to make a true step towards peace and put an end to the century-long strife, they could easily accomplish that by accepting the Palestinian refugees into their country, just as Israel did for the Jewish refugees that the Arab countries integrated them into their society. Okay? Moving on to the next slide. Population transfers are common. So when we're talking about this, I don't want you to be misled or miseducated in the fact that this is very common, especially in the wake of war. They have been practicing this throughout history. To give you some examples, I put them on there in your slides, in your notes as well. In 1923, Greece and Turkey agreed to the resettlement of 2 million Greeks and 800,000 Turks. I might chop up some of these nations, but in 1945, the resettlement of 3 million Germans from Poland and Czechoslovakia was arranged. Following the collapse of its North African empire, France accepted 1.5 million people. So this is common. This is very common. Other nations have done this. Other nations have absorbed refugees, transfers of different peoples for the sake of peace. But the Arab nations, with its enormous wealth and the vast underpopulated lands that it has, they've stubbornly refused to accept the Palestinian refugees into their nations. So it's clear that the Palestinian refugee problem is being kept alive for political purposes with great disregard for those in the camps that are really being impoverished and mistreated. Can you imagine generations after generations, your children's children's children are still living in these camps because the Arab nations around you refuse to allow you to enter into your culture, to enter into your nation? If even 1/2 of the 5 million refugees were to be allowed back into Israel, just to give you a picture, it would alter the geographical makeup of the whole entire nation, which would inevitably really destroy the Jewish nation of Israel, which is the goal. That is the goal. That is why the Palestinian refugees are being kept as a political tool, and the only solution is for them to re-enter the nation of Israel, because they know that once that happens, the Jewish nation, they will be overpopulated and it will be gone, basically, the Jewish nation of Israel. Moving on, land for peace. Looking at this picture and this map up here, you can also, if you have your manuals, this map is also on page 95, so if you want to reference it in your manual, you can look there as well. But the shaded yellow portion indicates predominantly Muslim regions. So all of that yellow portion is predominantly Muslim, the religion there. Well, tiny little red there, Israel, I believe it's white in your manual, that marks the nation of Israel, which is the only democratic nation in a sea of Muslim Arab nations surrounding it. So the combined land mass that the Arabs hold, look at that, in relation to the nation of Israel. Israel, just to give you an idea, is about the size of New Jersey. That's how big the nation of Israel is. It's about the size of New Jersey. While the combined Arab countries is 650 times the size of Israel. 650 times the size of Israel. So how can Israel, which occupies 1/6 of 1% of the land called by Arabs, be responsible for the political dissatisfaction of 22 Arab countries? How can that little piece of land be the whole cause of dissatisfaction for all of those Arab countries? How can 13 million Jews in the world be blamed for the problems of 300 million Arabs who have brotherly ties to 1.4 million Muslims worldwide? Think about that. Misconception. Moving on to the next slide. Misconception number 3 that we're going to talk about here now is Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. The misconception is Israeli treatment of the Palestinians today is compared to the treatment of Nazis towards the Jews, the politics of ethnic cleansing or genocide. Think about that. That's just insulting. That's like, can you imagine telling a Jewish person, telling the nation of Israel, which is predominantly those that fled from the Holocaust or were survivors of the Holocaust, telling them that their treatment of the Palestinian refugees, which they never pushed out of the land of Israel in the first place, is compared to the treatment of Nazi Germany. Can you believe that? Like, I don't know about you, but I'm not Jewish, but I feel that. I feel that a little bit. That just really is horrible. I want to read a quote from page 86. I wanted to reference this in the manual when it comes to this. Okay, let me make sure I have the right one. Yep. In a speech to visiting delegates of Europe on December 12, 2004 by Arnold Roth, and reported in the United Coalition for Israel on December 14, 2004, it was stated that a German survey of German-born Germans found that more than half think there is no difference between Israel's current treatment of the Palestinian Arabs of what the Nazis did to the Jews. 68% of Germans believe that Israel is waging a war of extermination against the Palestinians. So that is the primary, in 2004, primary belief of Germans when it comes to the current situation of how Israel is treating the Palestinian refugees. So in contrast to the Holocaust and more recent examples of genocide in Rwanda and Kosovo, there is no Israeli ideology, policy, or plan to persecute, exterminate, or expel Palestinian population, nor has there ever been. In direct contrast, the Nazis' final solution, which we talked about a little bit in the history of Christian anti-Semitism, the final solution to the Jewish problem was the deliberate, systematic, and mechanicalized extermination of European Jews. Hitler's final solution led to the calculated, predetermined murder of 6 million Jews and the destruction of thriving Jewish communities across Europe. You cannot say that Israel has a systematic final solution in place and an ideology in place for the extermination of the Palestinian refugees. There never has been and there never will be a plan for that. That has never been a part of Israel's foundation, never been a part of Israel's plans. There is no justification to that misconception there. The next misconception that we're going to talk about is Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. So the misconception is Israel's treatment of the Palestinians is similar to the treatment of blacks in apartheid South Africa. The term Israeli apartheid has been used by some scholars, United Nations investigators, human rights groups critical of Israel's policies, and those supported the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. So that this term is being widely used by some of those parties. Even before the creation of Israel as a state, leaders sought to avoid this situation that prevailed in South Africa. So this was already being considered by some of the Jewish and the Israeli leaders. Next slide. Here you see a quote from David Ben-Gurion to the Palestinian nationalist Musa al-Mali in 1934. This is before Israel became a state in 1948. He said, "We do not want to create a solution like that which exists in South Africa, where the whites are the owners and rulers and the blacks are the workers. If we do not do all kinds of work, easy and hard, skilled and unskilled, if we become merely landlords, then this will not be our homeland." That was his declaration there. So looking at this misconception, apartheid refers to official government policy of racial segregation that was formally practiced in South Africa. Whites sought to dominate non-white population because especially the indigenous blacks, and discriminated against people of color in political, legal, and economic sectors. Today, Jews are the majority, but Arab minorities are full citizens. That's why you cannot call this apartheid. You cannot categorize this in the same way that the apartheid happened in South Africa. The Arabs are minorities, but they have full rights and full citizenship, and they even have representation in the government. Moving on to misconception number 5, Israel discriminates against its Arab citizens. Israel is one of the most open societies in the world. Arabs in Israel have equal voting rights. In fact, it's one of the few places in the Middle East where Arab women may vote. In 1912, Arab parliament members held 11 seats in the 18 seats in Knesset, representing nearly 10% of the population. Arabs have been elected into the Knesset, which is the seat of government in Israel, in every single election since 1960s. Arabic, like Hebrew, is an official language in Israel. So the sole legal distinction between an Arab and Jewish citizen is that Arabs are not required to serve in the Israeli army. That is the only legal distinction that the Arab citizens have versus the Israeli citizens, that they are not required to serve in the army, where every Jewish citizen are required, men and women, to serve in the army. Some economies and social gaps happen between them because of this. So what that means is there's benefits to being in the army. There's benefits that are given to those who are in the army and those that have served in the army. So you can see some economic differences and gaps because of this. This does not mean the Arabs cannot serve in the army, but they're not required to serve in the army. I want to make that distinction, okay? But on the other hand, Arabs do have the advantage in this case of obtaining jobs during the years that Israelis are in the army. So they have the ability to gain jobs during that 3 required years that a boy, and I think 2.5 for girls, that are required to be in the army, which can try to balance out that equation there. Okay? You guys tracking with me? I know it's a lot of information. Okay, awesome. So, the wall. Oh, here we go. What are the facts? I really wanted you to see this picture. I hope you can see it clearly. So we're going to talk about the wall, the misconception of the wall that is out there. So after more than 3 years, how did this start? This is how we're going to begin here. So this started with more than 3 years of the Intifada, which was when the Palestinians uprised against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. That began, the uprisings began in 1987. Israel built a protective fence that would separate Israel proper from the West Bank and protect its citizens from murderous assaults, which so far have caused over 1,000 deaths of Jewish Israeli citizens. So the wall really is a protective fence that was put in place to protect the citizens of Israel. The Intifada would recruit young Palestinians to strap bombs to themselves and go into Israel's coffee shops, buses, and other public places and blow themselves up in order to take as many hated Jews with them to die. That was the goal of the Intifada. That was the uprising that was happening. Many of you probably saw in the news over and over again over that time, hearing about bombing after bombing after bombing, hearing about all of the suicide bombers that were taking place. That was praised, by the terrorist organizations. They were recruiting and they were praising suicide bombers for doing this and for going in and to kill. Their goal was to kill as many Jewish citizens as possible and to take them with them into death. So the sole purpose of building this fence was to protect Israel's citizens from suicide bombers. That was the sole purpose of this whole protective fence. And the reason why I call it a protective fence is because that is what it is. It's a protective fence, and the fence follows Israel's green line, which in other words was the armistice line that we talked about in other of our sessions, which is Israel's border between the armies of Israel and those of its surrounding neighbors and also the West Bank, okay? So 96 to 97% of this protective fence is a chain-linked fence. As seen here in the picture, you'll see it here on your right-hand side. That is what 96 to 97% of this protective fence looks like. It is a chain-linked fence which has sensors on it so that if anyone comes and it is a highly developed technological fence. So if anyone comes upon it, there's also video surveillance that Israel's army can detect, who's coming up to the fence, and then they can, address it at that point. But only 3 to 4% of it is a wall, which you'll see here on the left-hand side, what that wall looks like. Most of the pictures that you see in the news, most of the pictures that are put out there are of the wall, of that 3 to 4% of what this protective fence actually is. Now, the only reason why the difference between the majority of it being a fence and the 3 to 4% of it being a concrete wall, the only reason for that is to protect Israel from snipers. Because the place that they put the concrete wall was a place that they had the most sniper action happening, and where snipers were, shooting at cars and shooting at civilians. So they put a concrete fence in those locations to protect from snipers. Okay, yeah, Elaine? I don't know. I'd have to look that up. She asked if there's a wall around Gaza. I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure. So we'll look that up and we'll let you know. Since the protective fence has been created, there has been an immediate drop. 93% of total Israeli fatalities since this fence and since this small wall has been created. So it almost immediately eliminated the access to the, suicide bombers and the terrorist attacks that were coming into Israel's borders, Israel's nations, the populated area. So it almost immediately solved this issue. Okay? Some misconceptions about the protective fence. Again, we want to use that language because the misconception is that it's a huge wall. But what we want to get into our terminology and what we want to be aware about is it really is a protective fence, and that only 3% of it is a wall. And again, that is only because of the sniper issues that were happening in that region, in those territories, that those small walls were created, okay? So Israel's fence garners international condemnation, but the outrage is clear double standard. There is nothing new about the construction of a security fence. There's nothing new about this, guys. Many nations have fences to protect their borders, including the United States, for example, the one that we have to prevent illegal immigration. Many nations have this, but Israel's almost the only nation that receives condemnation over this protective fence. So, although criticism has sought to portray the security fence as a Berlin Wall, it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. The fence does not separate one people from another, where the Berlin Wall separates Germans from Germans, and it does deny freedom to those on either side. Israel's security fence separates two people, Israelis and Palestinians, and offers freedom and security for both parties involved. So for over 4 miles of the whole 83-mile radius of the fence is the concrete wall. So think of it in those terms. Only 4 miles of the 83 miles of what the fence is the concrete wall, and that was for sniper purposes. Secondly, while Israelis are fully prepared to live with Palestinians, only 20% of Israeli population, and 20% of Israeli population is already Arab, okay? So it's not them wanting to push and be separated from the Palestinian people, because they already have a 20% Arab population in the nation of Israel. Remember, those that didn't flee and receive full citizenship and have representation in their government. It is the Palestinians who say that they don't want to live with the Jewish people. They even call the West Bank, and I'm gonna chop this word up. I don't know if it's in here. I'm gonna try to do it justice. But they call the West Bank Judenrein. Okay, sorry if I'm chopping that up a little bit. But it means the exclusion of Jews. So that's what the Arab people call the West Bank. Most of, I'm not saying all Arabs, they're all Palestinians, but the majority of them are the ones claiming that they do not want to live with Jewish people, okay? Thirdly, the fence is not being constructed to prevent the citizens of one state from escaping. It is designed solely to keep terrorists out of Israel. That is the sole purpose of the protective fence. The truth is, the security fence was not to separate, harass, or isolate the Palestinians. Its sole purpose was to deter and prevent terrorism living in the West Bank and infiltrating Israel, to harm and to kill the Israeli citizens. That was the sole purpose of it. Of course, there are ramifications to it. Unfortunately, there are, as we know, ramifications to the protective fence that went up there. Because of that, before there was a protective fence, anyone who was anyone, there was no fence at all, there was no border at all. Anyone who was anyone could cross over into any territory, any place that they wanted to go. When the protective fence went up, unfortunately, some of what happened was that those Palestinians who did go into Israel for jobs and work, some of that was prevented. And unfortunately, that just had to happen because of the suicide attacks and the suicide bombings that were happening. That was one of the ramifications that did happen. So, I wanted to give you, I know that's really tiny, but I'm going to read it for you and you have it there in your notes. But I want to give you some other examples of accepted fences that have been built in the world. Okay, these are other fences that we just mentioned that have been widely accepted by the world, because the only one that we hear criticized about is this one in Israel. Okay? So there is a wall in Saudi Arabia being built to keep out terrorists and smugglers from Yemen. There is an extensive wall, twice as long as Israel, in disputed areas of Kashmir, including India and Pakistan. There has been a wall for decades dividing North and South Cyprus, which has kept the Greeks and Turks from killing each other. There's been peace lines, which is the British terminology for fence. Peace lines put in place in Belfast to curb bloodshed on both sides. Belfast. There is a fence between North and South Korea. Spain erected a barbed wire fence guarded by soldiers in Kuwait. Am I saying that right? Kuwait. On the border of Morocco. And there's also an electric fence between Botswana and Zimbabwe. Okay, so those are some examples. That's not even including the United. Those are some examples of accepted fences that have been built in other nations and other regions. Okay, but Israel, for some reason, is the only one being attacked for its protective fence that was in place that almost immediately eliminated terrorism from its Israeli citizens. Yes. No, it's not. It's not. And there are still places where it's being built, but there's some of it being stalled because in places that are disputed, like in the West Bank and other places that are disputed in Israel as being Palestinian territory, there's Israeli settlements there. So they don't want to cut their people, from safety, because ultimately what happens is, there's a border there now that will enable them from, coming back and forth. They can still get through by checkpoints, but it creates a few obstacles, so it's not over the whole West Bank. That's correct. Okay, awesome. Okay, so moving on, and hopefully we'll have I think we're moving through this pretty good, so we'll have some time at the end for any other questions that you guys may have. I know it's a lot of information. You guys are awesome. So I mentioned in the beginning that we also wanted to dive in a little bit about the misconception of Allah versus Yahweh, okay, or Jehovah, okay? So we're seeing Christians say that they worship the same God of Islam, that Allah is the same as the God of the Bible that our patriarchs, prophets, and apostles followed. Many Arab Christians in America are now referring to Jehovah, the God of the Bible, as Allah, using the same name for different gods served. The objective of interfaith movements, what is focused on political correctness and the unity of one religion movement. We're seeing a move of this in America. We're seeing this taking place all over the place. We're hearing this. We're hearing this terminology saying that Allah is the same as our God, the same as Jehovah. So we really want to be clear about this misconception that is widely being accepted in Christian circles, okay? It's important to understand that the name of Allah originated in polytheism. And that is long before Islam ever arose. Polytheism is the acceptance and the worship of many gods, not just one God, but many gods. So, hard evidence, and you can refer to this section in your manual if you want to dive deeper into this as well. But hard evidence demonstrates that the God Allah was a pagan deity. In fact, he was known as the moon god, okay? Mecca was in fact built as a shrine for the moon god, Allah, okay? The moon god was also called, and I'm going to butcher this bad, but you can see it. That's why I definitely wanted to put it in the screen so that you could see it. But the moon god was called Aliyah. You see it there, which was also known as the deity. The meaning of that was he was the chief, the high god among all the gods. So in polytheism, the moon god, which known as Allah, was the top god of all the gods, okay? It was later shortened to Allah in pre-Islamic times, okay? So this all predates Muhammad and the creation of Islam, okay? Muhammad adopted Allah as the God for the religion of Islam, okay? The Christian church exploded, and I thought this tidbit was really good because I dived into some research in this, and because I wanted to understand where the lines are being blurred in this understanding. So some of my research online, I found this to be really interesting. The Christian church exploded in the growth in the 1st century AD. Christian missionaries came from the Middle East and Africa regions in the late 2nd century. In an effort to evangelize the polytheistic Arabs, they sought a way to get these Arabs to understand the one true God, Jehovah. So in doing this, the missionaries, this is a theory, okay? The missionaries may have used the name Allah, understood by the polytheistic Arabs as the one God that's higher than all of the other gods, in an effort to evangelize the Arabs at that time, okay? Although we do not have a lot of proof of this, this is one of the theories that this may be where the lines have been blurred in some of the writings back then that they have researched. So, Arab Christians in pre-Islamic history used Allah as a reference to Jehovah, okay? So if this theory is true, Christian missionaries, through lack of discernment or understanding, might have used Allah, a god that the polytheistic Arabs were familiar with as being the supreme god of over 360 other gods that they worshipped at Mecca throughout the region as an evangelical tool back in the day, okay? So this is where they think the origin of this, the God of Allah and the God of Jehovah, the God, the lines back in history may have been blurred of a misunderstanding that may have been made that they are one and the same God. But what we need to understand is they are absolutely not, okay? I wanted to put this picture up here, and you have this in your notes as well, that these are some stark differences that we can stand on and that we know to be different from the God of Allah versus our one and true God, Jehovah, okay? So, for instance, if you look here, in Christianity, Jehovah, God does not change. God does not change. That's one of our core beliefs. But in Islam, Allah of Islam changes. Okay? And there's the reference there in the Quran. And you have the reference there in our Bible where it states over and over again, but there's the reference that we have in James 1:17 that God does not change. But we also, I wanted to show you the reference there in the Quran where it talks about the God of Allah does change. Okay? Moving on, God loves everyone. John 3:16. Our God, Jehovah. Allah is temperamental. That says that in the Quran in that reference. Another difference, God cannot lie, Titus 1:2. And then in the Quran it says Allah deceives. Okay, another stark difference is God is triune. John 6:27, and there's some other references there. But in the Quran and in the religion of Islam, the Trinity is blasphemy. And there is the reference there in the Quran where it states that. And it goes on. You know, there's many different references there, but mainly, you know, we need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that when you're hearing this misconception out there, and when people try to tell you, or you see on the news that Allah is the same God as the God that we serve, that is absolutely not true. They are not the same God, okay? Okay. So we have a little bit of time. I'm going to go over some quick facts and stats. So I'm going to go over some things that we have been talking about in this session, but we'll also go over a couple things that we have talked about throughout this whole session in diving into Israel as God's timepiece in the world, okay? So looking at some quick stats. I know that is so small, but you have it there in your reference, okay? I thought this was very interesting. You also can look at this in your workbook as well. But explaining the Arab-Israeli conflict through numbers. If you're looking at just the conflict through pure numbers, you can look at some of these statistics here. There is a ton of them, but I'm only going to reference a few of them, okay? So, number of times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Old Testament, over 700 times. Number of times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran, 0. Number of Arab leaders who visited Jerusalem when it was under Arab rule, from 1948 to 1967, only 1. Number of territories attacked by Israeli or Jews since 1967, there has been 6. But number of terrorist attacks by Arabs or Muslims since 1967, thousands of them have occurred. Number of Arab countries, 1. Wait a minute. I don't know why. What is this? Let me go back. I'm sorry, that was an error in the thing. Number of Arab countries, 22. Number of Arab democracies, 0. That's what it's supposed to say. Sorry about that error in there, okay? Number of Jewish countries, 1. Number of Jewish democracies, 1. Okay? Just to give you some statistics by number. There's many, many more of them. Number, for instance, some that aren't on your page, number of resolutions against Israel in the UN, 97 of them. Number of resolutions against Arab states, 4. I'm trying to see if there's any others I want to say here. Here's another one. Number of Muslims in the world, more than 1 billion. Number of Muslim demonstrations against Islamic terror, approximately 2. There's a lot of those that you can dive into. You can look at those in your manual as well. But let's move on to 10 facts that you need to know. So 10 takeaways that you need to know from this entire class. We have one more session left. Next week, you definitely want to be a part of it because we're going to be talking about the feasts, and we're going to feast. So I'm really, really excited about that. We're going to enjoy some Mediterranean cuisine. But, just an overview of 10 common facts that we want you to know and to take away from this, okay? So fact number 1, like the United States, Israel is a democracy. The Knesset, Israel parliament, includes men, women, Jews, Arabs, and represents all segments of Israeli society. Okay? Fact number 2, Israel is not a European creation. You heard that a little bit in the video as well. Jews are indigenous to this part of the world, and there has been a continuous Jewish presence in the land of Israel and in the Middle East for more than 3,000 years. Fact number 3, the combined land mass of Arab countries is 650 times the size of Israel. To put that in perspective, Israel is the size of New Jersey, and the Arab countries are the size of the United States, Mexico, and all the Central America combined. Fact number 4, the Arabs of Palestine were offered their own state, side by side with Israel in 1947 by the United Nations, according to Resolution 181. It was rejected and followed by an invasion of 5 Arab armies to destroy Israel. So they were offered their own land and they rejected it. Fact number 5, during the 1948 War of Independence, more Jews were expelled from Arab nations and Arabs displaced from Israeli territories. Israel has absorbed the Jewish refugees, yet the Arab world refuses to absorb the Arab refugees into their countries. Fact number 6, Israel gained control of the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria from Jordan and Gaza from Egypt. Sometimes referred to as the disputed territories. During the Six-Day War of the 1967, after Israel's Arab neighbors mass-trooped along their borders and once again threatened her destruction. So Israel gained control of the West Bank, okay? So fact number 7, following the Six-Day War, Israel offered to return the West Bank to Jordan and Gaza to Egypt in exchange for peace. Their offer was rejected. Fact number 8, because that's not their ultimate aim anyway. Their aim isn't a territory. Their aim isn't a nation. Their aim is to wipe Israel off the map. That's their aim. So fact number 8, in the summer of 2000, Israel offered the Palestinian Arabs 97% of the land they claimed to be fighting for, making Israel the first and only country ever to offer the Palestinian Arabs a homeland. This offer was rejected with no counteroffer from the Palestinian Arabs. I know. That's right, Bev. Wow. Fact number 9, Israel voluntarily removed every citizen from Gaza in 2005. Some of you may have remembered this on the news. Families weeping, families being ripped away from their homes. It was devastating to watch. Giving full control to the Palestinians in hope for peace. In return, the terrorist organization Hamas now controls Gaza and has launched over 10,000 missiles into Israel. Fact number 10, and we'll end with this. 3 major attempts to destroy Israel have been carried out by the Arab world. In 1947, in 1967, and in 1973. Although many neighboring countries today still wish to destroy Israel, Israel continues to seek peace. Israel has forged peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan and has lived in peace with these countries ever since. So these are our takeaways from today's class, okay? So I hope I know that was a lot of information. Thank you so much for, absorbing it with me. Thank you so much for those of you who are watching. Those hopefully were shown to you. And if you guys want, over webcast, if you guys want the PowerPoint slides, just email our office and we can send those to you as well for your information and for your study purposes, okay? So what I want to do is I want to open it up to any comments, any questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll write them down and we'll research them and try to present them next week as well. But any comments, anything also that you may have learned today that just opened your eyes, or maybe you knew, but it was like a fresh revelation to you, or anything, anyone. Elaine, I'll have you speak into the microphone.
Sure, just a couple things. First question, though. Many Palestinians have left and have been established in other lands, United States being one, Europe. They're all over the place now. Do we know how many have been assimilated into other countries as citizens? Because I know just from personal experience with my son-in-law, he's got family all over the world. And they're citizens of the U.S., Germany, wherever they are.
No, that's definitely a good question. I know that some of them have assimilated, but I don't think many. So I will try to research and come up with that number for you. But I don't think it's a lot of them. But I'll research that for you, Elaine. Yeah.
And I think the most startling thing to me was that, I guess the one observation I have is that when Jordan had all of the West Bank under its control and Egypt had Gaza, they could have given the land back to the Palestinians because it was theirs. They could have set up the Palestinian state and never did, and given the refugees back into their land, what they claim is their land, and never did. I think that, yeah, and that was just remarkable to me. But all the Palestinian, I learned a lot about the Palestinian situation. I did not know that everyone who's a Palestinian is considered a refugee. Now, they can be citizens of other nations, and they're still considered refugees. So that, to me, was really an eye-opener.
I know. It was really interesting to me as well that the UN has 2 departments for refugees. One is the one that they have around the whole entire world to help place refugees and assimilate them into nations. But then they created a special part for just the Palestinian refugees. And that is to that will only, like you said, that will only be eliminated when those refugees are back in their home in Israel, which makes them a continual refugee. It's astonishing to me as well. So anything else, anything that was enlightening or any question? Yeah.
I just had one incident. I used to have a bumper sticker on my car that said, because I am a Christian, I am for Israel. And I had pulled up into the parking lot into a grocery store and see all of the universities teach BDS. All of the universities in the United States, all of these young people, they believe that Israel is apartheid, and they're discriminating against, and they're murdering Palestinians left and right. And 3 guys in a car pulled up next to me, young guys, and they walked around the back of my car and saw that thing, and they were just standing there looking at it. I was afraid to get out of my car because I felt like hostility toward that, like they were going to say something. They didn't say anything. But it was just, my oldest son went to Eastern. He is totally indoctrinated that way. He believes, all of the garbage. He believes all of the myths. And the universities are just rife with the BDS thing. And so we have to really pray against that indoctrination.
Absolutely, as a prayer point, we do specifically need to pray for our universities and our young people and our college campuses, because they are, like Edie was saying, I'm just reiterating it for those of you who have not heard it, they are indoctrinating, our young people on the college campuses, that all of these misconceptions that we're hearing are truth, and they're speaking it as truth, and they're really forming an ideology in college campuses of this. So we absolutely need to be praying for that. And we need to be aware. Some people just aren't aware, of the truth behind these misconceptions. And that's why this is so important. So that's good. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Remember the late 70s, and maybe you talked about it in prior classes, but PLO?
PLO? Mm-hmm.
Palestine Liberation Organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so much news that they got in our media.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like the fact that they were right.
Yeah, absolutely. One. Yep.
Just an observation and things I learned from our trips in Israel. I thought it was a very good quote that you had from Hillary Clinton stating that Israel is a model democracy. And the reason for that is here in the States, we basically have a 2-party system. Yeah. In Israel, they have many parties, and any one party cannot come into a 51% majority. So they have to build coalitions with other parties, and these coalitions have to work together to make the government work. So they're used to doing things in a more cooperative manner, and they've actually been able to maintain that over the years, whereas we've kind of disintegrated into an almost civil war situation, or civil unrest. I guess if you would call it that, but it's a very remarkable system. I love the way that they do democracy.
No, I agree. That's a really good point. That's really important. It's good. Okay, awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight, to being a part of this. Thank you so much over webcast again. And our last session will be next week, so make sure you're here 7 o'clock, because we're going to be eating and feasting together and learning about the major feasts that take place in Jewish culture and our culture, because they're of the Bible. They're God's feasts, right? So I'm excited. I'm excited to dive into that, and I'm excited about the food too, so it's going to be awesome. And you over webcast, your mouths will just be salivating, and you'll just be with us in spirit. Amen. Okay, God bless you guys. Drive safe home. Blessings.